We have an incredible speaker who has joined us from the great state of New York to talk about her journey. A couple things before we get started, and I bring your student body president in to kick this off. One, remember to silence your cell phones, put them away, and also please remember that when we have assemblies, the expectation is that we are celebrating and learning together. Much as we learned from Erin Jones when she came out and spoke to us earlier in the month, we have the same opportunity to hear from an amazing woman who has an amazing story that resonates with all of us. Remember, what makes Mount Vernon great is that we, even though we look different and may have different backgrounds, we have the same love for the community and the same love for the school. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Julisa Arce and show her why Mount Vernon is the best high school in the state of Washington. All right.
Good evening, Bulldogs! Would you please all rise and help me welcome our state-qualified, incredible mariachi band here to perform the national anthem.
And here are some of my officers. We are pleased to introduce our guest speaker. She is here to share her story of growing up undocumented in the state of Texas to working her way up becoming a vice president on Wall Street. And she's also the author of two best-selling books and a board member on the National Immigration Law Center. She continues to help everyone succeed in life by offering guidance to help other undocumented women achieve their dreams. Please welcome Julisa Arce.
Thank you. Hi everyone. How is everybody doing today? Good? Yeah? So everybody, a lot of people think that I still live in New York City, but I actually now live in California, so I'm a little bit closer to all of you, but the weather here is very different than it is in LA, so I've been very cold during the time I've been here. You guys are a big crowd. I don't think I've spoken to a crowd this big in a while, so thank you so much for having me. What I want to do in the time that we have together is I want to share some stories about my journey coming to the US and being an undocumented student in Texas. And then I also want to spend some time answering your questions. So hopefully you guys are thinking about questions as I'm speaking, and if there's anything that I don't touch on that you're curious about or you want to know more, I am an open book. So please have questions ready. And I think what we're going to do is, if you do have a question, we kind of just want you to come down here. So I'll kind of tell you when we're getting closer to that point of the talk. Where I want to start the story is when I was a child living in Mexico. I used to live in a small town called Tasco Guerrero, which is 3 hours south of Mexico City. It's a really beautiful town. There's cobblestone streets and all the houses are painted white on the outside. It's in the mountains. It's a very, very beautiful place. There's a church there that was built in the 1700s, so that's how much history and rich history there is in the place where I come from. Before I came to live in the US, I'm gonna move this. Before I came to live in the US, I used to have certain ideas about America. I used to watch a lot of cartoons and television shows that were dubbed in Spanish. And from these television shows, I got certain ideas about what America was going to be like. So Dennis the Menace was my favorite cartoon growing up. I think most of you are probably too young to have seen it, but maybe some of you have caught some videos on YouTube. But it was my favorite cartoon. And in one of the episodes, I distinctly remember there was an episode where the mean neighbor's house gets taken away on wheels. And so when I was 8 years old, I used to think that all Americans lived in these houses that could move, and I wanted to move to the US and live in one of those houses with my parents. And then I got a little bit older, and I started watching Beverly Hills 90210, the original version. And I thought, okay, well, those are different kinds of houses. I think I want to live there instead. And now, like I said, I live in Los Angeles, which is, Beverly Hills is right in Los Angeles. So I'm getting a little bit closer to that dream. But the one thing that really stood out to me about the television shows that I watched and how Americans were portrayed is that these images that you see on the screen is how Americans were presented. These are the only images I ever saw of people being called American. And I think you can see from this picture that there's a lot of people that are missing from those images. People that look like me, people that look like your classmates in this gym that are also American. But growing up in Mexico, and frankly, moving to the United States, these were still the images that I saw of people being considered American. Even though when I was in Mexico and I was learning Mexican history, I of course learned of the vast land that was Mexican land that later became the United States. And Mexicans were living in those places before they became part of the United States. But I never learned about those Americans, which made it hard to think that I could fit in the United States, because when you don't see people who look like you, it's hard to imagine yourself in those same positions, in those same situations. So when I came to live in the United States, I was 11 years old, and I didn't speak any English. I knew like 5 words of English from a song I had learned when I was in school. And that, of course, came with some challenges, because I think that there is this misconception that if you don't speak English, that means you're not smart. And I think that some people believe that when you are in English as a second language classes, that somehow those classes are for people who are not as smart as everyone else. And I would just like to say that is completely wrong, because it doesn't mean that. It just simply means you don't know the language yet and you're learning it. For me, after I was done learning how to speak English, well, now I'm bilingual because now I speak 2 languages. And that has had a lot of advantages in my life and in my career. The other thing that was difficult about moving here is that when I moved to the US and I was learning about the history of the United States and the heroes, of the American heroes, I rarely ever encountered any heroes or any people that had a similar background as I did. Just raise your hand if you recognize any of the people on this slide. Okay, there's some hands going up. Okay. Can somebody just shout out who it is they recognize on the slides? Okay. Justice Sotomayor is usually the person that most people recognize, right? And she is, if you're looking at the projector this way, she's a woman on the right-hand side, the upper right-hand corner. And she's a Supreme Court Justice. She's Puerto Rican, and she's the first Latina ever to be a Supreme Court Justice. I never learned about her when I was in school, even though she became a Supreme Court Justice within the last 10 years, but still, she had an amazing story even before that. There is Ellen Ochoa, who is the astronaut on the woman astronaut on the slide. She's the first Latina to ever go into space. So I always like to think that Latinos, we have even reached the stars. I know it's kind of cheesy, but I still like to say it. There is Jose Hernandez, who's also an astronaut, whose parents were migrant workers, and he himself was a migrant worker. He used to pick strawberries in California and then come to Washington State and pick fruits and vegetables here. And he would move to all the different places to pick the vegetables and the fruit that we eat. And today, he is a retired astronaut. He went into a mission in space. I wish I had learned about him as well. I also wish I had learned about so many of the other Latinos that really had a shaping hand in our history. When I was in school, I'm sure many of you now are learning about the Civil Rights Movement. Right? Are you guys learning about the Civil Rights Movement? Or have learned about it? Or are going to learn about it? I'm pretty sure. So when I was learning about the Civil Rights Movement, I used to wonder, like, where were Latinos during that time? Like, what were we doing when all of these fights were happening and where people were fighting for their rights? What were we doing? And in school, at least, I didn't learn about the things that we were doing. But later on, I did learn a few things, and I wanted to just share just two stories with you. The first one is about a woman named Diana in Crystal City, Texas, who wanted to be a cheerleader. And when she got to her high school was 85% Mexican American. And when she got to her high school, she wanted to try out to be a cheerleader because she had been a cheerleader in middle school. And she was told that she couldn't apply or she couldn't try out to be a cheerleader because there was already one Mexican American cheerleader. Because even though the school was 85% Mexican American, there could only be one cheerleader that was Mexican American. The other spots were reserved for white students. As you can tell, that doesn't sound very fair at all. There's no real reason why they should have that rule. And when the students in the high school complained to the school board, which was majority white, they were told, okay, our solution for this is to have 3 Mexican American cheerleaders and 3 white cheerleaders. But all of the students who want to become cheerleaders need to have one parent that has a high school degree. I just broke this, sorry. I get very excited talking about this stuff. There it goes. So that was our solution, which of course there's no reason why cheerleaders need to have a parent with a high school diploma, and many of the parents in this community didn't have high school diplomas. And that was their way to continue to have mostly white cheerleaders on the squad. Well, the students organized, and they, for 17 days straight, took part in walkouts. And because of those walkouts, they were able to get rid of that rule. And within 2 years, the city council and the school board looked much more like the community that they served. So that's one story. The other story is about students in Los Angeles, in East Los Angeles. And they also organized walkouts because at that time, if you spoke Spanish in the hallway, you could get suspended. You can get physically struck by a teacher for speaking Spanish. And these students organized, and they created quite a bit of change, not just in their own school, but the entire state of California. I didn't know that at some point Mexican food could not be served in school cafeterias. Can you guys imagine that? A cafeteria without Mexican food? I mean, that seems kind of crazy to me. And students literally had to organize and fight in order for that to be allowed. And I just wish that I had learned about these things because I really believe that they would have helped me to feel like I belonged in my school, like I belonged in this country. Because when I turned 14 years old, the visa that I used to come to the United States expired, and I became undocumented. Are people in the room familiar with what it means to be undocumented? Yeah? Okay, so some of you understand what that means. When I was 14, I certainly didn't know what it meant to be undocumented. But all I knew that when I asked my mom, I wanted to go to Mexico to have my quinceañera. And people know what a quinceañera is? You've been one, you've had one. Well, I really wanted to have a quinceañera since I was like very little because my sisters both had huge quinceañeras. I mean, my one sister even had doves that flew after the mass, and they were really big deals in my family. So I wanted to have a quinceañera just like my sisters had one. And I told my mom, I was like, Mom, I really want to go to Mexico to celebrate my quince años with our family there. And that's when she said to me that I couldn't go to Mexico because my visa was expired. And if I went to Mexico, I wasn't going to be able to come back to the US. Or if I did come back to the US, this time I wasn't going to come here on a plane. I was going to have to cross the border because I wouldn't have the paperwork necessary to come back. So that day when my mom shared this with me, I was crushed. And to be honest, I wasn't thinking, I'm so sad because I'm undocumented, because I didn't know really what that meant. I was sad because I couldn't have my party that I had been dreaming of forever. It was until later that I started to realize that being undocumented had pretty big consequences. I really wanted to go to college, and my mom would always tell me she brought me to this country so I could have a better education, and that the work that we were doing, we used to sell funnel cakes at the market square in San Antonio, this tourist spot in San Antonio. We used to sell funnel cakes, and we used to sell aguas frescas, and we used to sell fajita tacos, and my mom would say, this work is really honest work, but it's also really hard work, and I don't want you to be doing this forever. So the plan was always, I'm going to do really well in school, and I'm going to go to college. Well, when I graduated from high school, I graduated in the top 5% of my high school class. I had worked really hard, studied really long hours, even though I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to go to college or not. And there were times when I would think to myself, what's the point of studying so hard? What's the point of it being 10 p.m. and I'm still studying for this final if at the end of the day, I'm not going to be able to go to college? Because at that time, undocumented students couldn't go to college in Texas. But I always would remember something my mom would tell me all the time, which was, there are a million things that you cannot control, but try to focus on the things that you can. I couldn't control what the laws in Texas were going to be, but I could control my grades. I could study harder and try to earn the A. I could get more involved in student activities. And so I did all of those things. And when I applied to colleges and universities, I got rejected from every single one of them. I mean, I had my schools that were my safety schools, and then my reach schools, and then schools that I thought I had a really good chance of getting in. But every single one of the envelopes that I received were rejection letters. And it was difficult, to be honest. It was really hard to think that I had worked so hard, and now, despite my efforts, I was still getting the door slammed in my face. And it wasn't because I didn't work hard enough. It was because I didn't have a 9-digit social security number. And that really, really, really stung. Because when I first came to live in the US, my parents would tell me that America was the land of opportunity and chicken McNuggets. And opportunity wasn't available to me. Even though I had worked really hard to be able to go to college. And then there was also the part of having to lie to my friends and having to lie to my classmates because, one, to be honest, I was embarrassed about being undocumented. I didn't want my classmates to know because I didn't want them to look at me differently. I also had to lie about why I wasn't doing certain things. Like when we all turned 16 and everybody was getting their driver's licenses. And I couldn't go take the test because undocumented people in Texas are not allowed to have driver's licenses, even today. When my classmates were asking me about where I was going to go to college and if I wanted to be roommates with them in different schools that we were all applying to, I couldn't make those plans. I also couldn't tell them the real reason why I wasn't applying to college. I wasn't going to college. I would say I have to stay home and help take care of my mom because my mom had gotten in a very terrible accident my senior year in high school that left her in a coma for 3 months. And I would say, I'm staying home to take care of my mom, which was partly true, but that wasn't the real reason why I wasn't going to college. And then I got really, really lucky, and sometimes you really do just have to get lucky. But you have to be prepared to take advantage of that luck. The state of in 2001 became the first state in the US to allow undocumented students to go to college and pay in-state tuition. 2001 was the year that I graduated from high school. So about a month after I graduated high school, my uncle saw this news report about this new law, and I could not believe it. I couldn't believe that this law had passed and that now I was going to be able to go to college. It was a really happy time, but it also was a time of really big sacrifice because my mom and my dad went back to Mexico so that I could use the money from our funnel cake stand to pay for college. Because even though I could receive state financial aid, that still wasn't enough to pay for college, and as an undocumented student, I wasn't eligible for federal financial aid. I wasn't eligible to fill out the FAFSA. So my parents went back to Mexico and I stayed behind. And I understood that the real price of my education wasn't the money I was paying. The real price of my education was being separated from my family. But those were the choices and the sacrifices that I had to make as an undocumented person in order to pursue this American dream that we so often talk about, without really talking about what it means for different types of people. I went off to college and I tried to have the best experience possible. I really enjoyed college. But I was also a first-generation college student, so there was a lot of the college process that I wasn't really sure how to navigate. But I am really grateful for the mentors that I had, for the organizations that made it possible for me to have a really great college experience. And then I remember being in college and I saw a poster that said I could earn $10,000 working on Wall Street for the summer. Earlier, somebody asked me why I decided to be a finance major, and to be honest, I told them, and I'm going to tell you, I wanted to go work on Wall Street because I just wanted to make a lot of money. Because I thought if I could make a lot of money, then maybe I'll be able to fix my immigration status, and even if I can't, I'll be rich, so whatever. I'm just kidding, I really wanted to fix my immigration status. That was like my #1 goal in life, was to fix my immigration status so that I wouldn't have to live in this constant fear of what's going to happen. Is today the day that somebody's going to find out? Is today the day that immigration is going to pick me up and take me away? And living in that constant fear was very difficult, all while trying to do well in school and trying to get this internship that I wanted to get working on Wall Street. Eventually, as you guys can probably guess from the bio, I was able to get a job on Wall Street. I became a vice president when I was 26 years old at Goldman Sachs, which is arguably the most important investment bank in the world. I always like to tell people that my story my story has a really happy ending. It has a really joyful ending because I'm standing here with all of you today. I was able to become a United States citizen on August 8th of 2014. And that was a really, thank you, and some people will clap, thank you. Thank you. That was a really happy day in my life, of course. And the reason that I was able to become a U.S. citizen, because I want to explain this because there's a lot of times when undocumented people are asked, why don't you apply to become a citizen? Why don't you do it the right way? I know I get that question asked constantly. And the very short answer to it is because there is no such thing as a right way. There is no such thing as an application for us to fill out. Most undocumented people don't qualify to become American citizens, and therefore we stay undocumented. The only reason I was able to become a U.S. citizen is because my husband is a U.S. citizen, and I was able to apply through him. But also remember that I came here with a tourist visa, so I never crossed the border. And that made all the difference in my application process. Because if I had crossed the border, even if I had married a U.S. citizen, I might still not be able to fix my immigration status. And to me, that seems a little bit arbitrary, because I was 11 when I came here, and if my parents didn't have the resources that they had at that time, I probably would have had to cross the border. And then I wouldn't be able to fix my immigration status. And to be honest, getting my citizenship through my husband is one of the most ironic things in my life, because my mom brought me to this country so I could be an independent woman. And then none of my own accomplishments could save me. I had done really well in school. I had earned a ton of money working on Wall Street. I had gotten a ton of promotions, and none of that mattered. It wasn't until we were married that all of a sudden I was eligible. And don't get me wrong, I'm really grateful for it because of course it changed my life. But I still always think, why wasn't the things that I did enough? Regardless though, I had a pretty good life at that point. I had a husband that could dance, really big deal. I had a really great career. I was now an American citizen. I could finally travel to Mexico to see my mom. I could finally travel everywhere. When I was young, all I really wanted to do was to travel the world, and I couldn't because I didn't have the right papers. But now I did, and so I traveled everywhere. I went back to Mexico to visit. In a few years before I became a citizen, my dad fell really sick in Mexico, and my sister called me to tell me that he was really sick and they weren't sure if he was going to make it through the night. And I had a really big decision to make. I had to think about, if I go to Mexico, how am I going to come back? And if I don't go and something happens to my dad, how am I ever going to be able to live with myself? And I agonized over what to do for many hours. I thought, what do I do? Do I stay? Do I go? And in those hours of trying to figure out what to do, my dad passed away. And I never got to see him alive again. And when I finally became a citizen, I was able to go, and it was really painful, to be honest, because I didn't get to see my dad. I had to go visit his grave. And I share that with you because those are the types of really awful sacrifices and choices that people who are undocumented have to make every single day. I'm hardly the only person that this has happened to. And because of all of the things that I went through in my life, and because I also had the great privilege of becoming a citizen, I also knew that I had a powerful voice and a powerful story that I needed to share. I mentioned that when I was in school, I never learned about people like myself. And even today, today, there are very few books that talk about the immigrant experience from a first-hand standpoint. And most people get their ideas about immigrants from sources that are not always accurate, that are not always nuanced, that are sometimes very one-sided. And I thought that if I could share my story, maybe I could, one, help people who are undocumented feel a little bit less alone because somebody else had experienced the things that they experienced. And secondly, maybe sharing my story might help people outside of my community to understand what it's really like to be undocumented, the sacrifices that we have to go through, but also the resilience that we have, right? Because I know I shared some pretty sad stories in the time that we've had so far, but to be honest, like I also have had a really happy life. I have a lot of love in my life. I have amazing friends that became my family. I've been able to travel all over the world now. And even when I was undocumented, let me tell you, I enjoyed life. I had a great time. I wasn't always feeling sorry for myself. And so I also didn't want other people to feel sorry for me. So in my books, I don't just share the bad stories, the sad stories, but I really like to also share the happy stories. These are the books that I have written. My Underground American Dream was the first book that I wrote in 2016, and Someone Like Me is a book that I wrote in 2018. And I'm really excited because my first book, My Underground American Dream, is being developed as a television series. So, thank you. So now I can add executive producer to my titles, which is really exciting. Of course, I'm excited and thrilled that there's going to be a story on television based on my life. I mean, that's pretty cool. But the thing that makes me most excited is that we are going to see a Mexican-American family on television that isn't the stereotypical way in which Hollywood presents Latinos. There was a study done a few years ago that showed what types of roles Latinos had on Hollywood movies and films. There are very few that we have because even though the United States is 18% Latino and 20% of the people who buy movie tickets are Latino, in the movies, only 6% of Latinos have speaking roles on those films. And so what makes me most excited is that we're going to have a different type of Latino family on television that is it's a much more accurate and nuanced portrayal of Latinos, where we're not being portrayed as the criminals, because that's most often than not, unfortunately, the roles that we're casted in Hollywood. So I have shared a lot of stories with all of you. I hope that you take from them something that you can use in your own life. But the biggest thing that I want you guys to take away from today and from the stories that I have shared are a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that every one of you in this room know that you belong in this gym, you belong in this school, you belong in this country. Regardless of where you came from, regardless of your background, regardless of any of those things, you belong. And the second thing that I want you all to really believe is that no matter what challenges you are presented with, no matter what obstacles life throws your way, it truly, really is possible to achieve all the things that you want. And you have the strength and you have the determination to make those dreams happen, so don't ever let anybody tell you that your dreams are too big. Because if they say that to you, honestly, that just means that they are not dreaming big enough. So please dream really big and do everything in your power to pursue those dreams. Thank you. Okay, we're at the point of the talk where you guys get to ask questions. And I hope you do, because I am always most interested in answering your questions. So if you have a question, there's a mic that was set up right here. So please come ask some questions. If there are no any questions, I'm just going to assume that I did such an amazing job that there are no questions.
My question to you is not only high school, it has its Latinx community of around 54%. We have a very strong presence here in Harvard, I'm very proud of, and I know a lot of us too. My question is a large question or a question that persons are adopting. So what pieces of advice can you give them to help them be successful in their future years and helping them future goals?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So the question, just to repeat it in case some of you didn't hear it, was what advice would I give to undocumented students today? And one, it is my understanding that in Washington State, undocumented students can go to college and receive in-state tuition. So that already is a really big step to be able to go to college. But my advice really is, one, not to give up, because you never know what can happen. There are, every day, a million things that we cannot control, but there are also things that we can. And how prepared we are in life is truly 100% up to us. And those are the things that we need to focus on. So, as I mentioned in my talk, there were absolutely times when I used to think, what's the point of studying so hard if I'm not even going to be able to go to college or have the career that I want? But you never know what can happen. I mean, I shared how a month after I graduated from high school, this law changed. So just focus on the things that you can control. Don't let yourself get bogged down by the anxiety of what's going to happen tomorrow, because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, but what we do have is today and how much of ourselves we give to our dreams. Thank you for asking me. Listen, when I was in 6th grade, I hated 6th grade because I got made fun of almost every day for a bunch of really silly things. Like, I used to have really long hair, like to below my waist, really long, thick black hair. And then students would make fun of me and say, like, oh my God, look at her and her Pocahontas hair. And now when I go on Facebook and I see some of those people that would tell me that, and now they get hair extensions for their hair to be that long. And my hair naturally was that beautiful. I was made fun of because the lunch that I brought to school smelled funny. When, in reality, when I would bring like that little boy to school, like, my lunch was bomb, much better than, just like a fry sandwich. I was made fun of because I idioms, right? Like when somebody once said to me, break a leg, I was like, that is so mean. And they were like, no, that's like good luck. But I was learning a new language, right? And so I think the biggest thing is that when people bully you, especially when you're young, especially when you're in middle school and even now in high school, when people are mean to you, it says so much more about them than it says about you. And I promise you that when you're not in high school anymore, when you're in college, none of the high school things that are happening right now are going to matter at all. They're just not going to. You're going to go to college and you're going to meet so many more people, or you're going to work, you're going to go into the workforce and meet so many more people, and all of those people who bullied you, they're the ones who are going to have to look at themselves in the mirror later on and really wrestle with themselves about why they said those things. I love Whataburger. What do I get at Whataburger? Okay. Are there Whataburgers in Washington State? No. Okay. So Whataburger is like a fast food burger joint in Texas, and it is so much better than. Do you guys have In-N-Out? No. What do you guys have here? Whataburger's still better. So it's really better. Another question? Hang on guys, I want to hear your classmate's question.
How can they be allowed to undocumented and undocumented?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. In my book, I talk about my friend Tiffany. And Tiffany and I met when we were 10 years old in 6th grade. She didn't speak English and I didn't speak Spanish, but somehow we became best friends. And 25 years later, we're still best of friends. She was a bridesmaid at my wedding, and we continue to be like sisters. And the reason I mentioned Tiffany is because when there were points in my life that I felt that I couldn't keep going anymore, it was my friend Tiffany that really encouraged me to keep going. And sometimes I think that if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be where I am today. So being an ally doesn't always have to mean that you're doing really big things. And I'll get to some of those bigger things also. But being an ally also means being a friend and listening to what somebody else is going through. And sometimes you don't have to try to relate to it, right? Like, there are people that share things with me that I will never be able to relate to it, and I think sometimes it's unfair to try to make comparisons in my life and theirs, but I'm there to listen and to ask them how it is that I can help. So one, be a friend. Two, for those of you that are 18 that can vote, please go out and vote, like exercise your right to vote. I think at the state and local level, at least in Texas, every year since this law passed that allowed undocumented students to go to college, every year there's a coalition on the opposite side of the issue that are trying to repeal that law. And so I don't know how it is here in Washington State, but I can imagine that there's people that don't agree that undocumented students should be able to go to college. And so when you see those things happening, like organize, show up to support the undocumented and DACA community. Thank you. in your question, which is to use your voice, right? You can use your voice here in your school, in your classrooms. You can, I think a lot of times we forget that our voice and our rights as citizens of this country is that not only can we vote, but we can also pick up the phone and call our congressman and call our senator. I think sometimes we forget that the people in Congress, they work for us. They get paid with our tax dollars. And therefore they do have to answer when we make a phone call, right? They have that responsibility. And so use your voice. And you can use your voice in many different ways. I happen to have decided and chosen that I was going to use my voice through my writing. So I'm constantly writing, not just books, but writing opinion pieces about all of the injustices as I see them that are happening to immigrants on the border, that are happening with families being separated, that are happening with DACA program being up in the air. And so that is how I've chosen to use my voice. But just remember that however you choose to use your voice in whatever medium, I was in a different high school this morning and there was this beautiful mural. And so your art can also be your voice. So whatever talents you have, and everybody in this room has talent, use those talents as your voice. Thank you. That's a really good question. I share in that experience because I also was the first person in my family to go to college in the U.S. And there's a lot of things that seemed really overwhelming that I didn't know how to navigate because I didn't have that guidance at home. So I really encourage all of you that are going to be first-generation college students to take advantage of all the resources that colleges and universities offer to first-generation college students, because there are a lot of programs that can pair you up with an upperclassman that can guide you. There are counselors that you can see. So my biggest advice is not to be embarrassed to ask questions, not to be embarrassed to seek out help, because the worst thing that can happen is that you fall so far behind because you didn't ask for help when there are resources available. And the other thing that I'll say is this. When I was in college, there were times when I thought, maybe I'm not smart enough to be here. Because I got into the business school at the University of Texas at Austin, which is the top 5 business school in the nation. And there were times when I would think, do I really even belong here? And later on, when I went to go work at Goldman Sachs, I remember thinking, am I smart enough to be here? Because a lot of my colleagues went to Harvard and they went to Princeton, and they had parents who had previously worked on Wall Street or uncles that worked on Wall Street, and I didn't have any of those advantages. So then I switched my mindset. And I thought I didn't have any of those same advantages, and I'm still here, right? So that must mean that I'm even smarter than everybody else because I'm still here. And so as a first-generation college student, you have to know that you've earned your place. Nobody came to you and said, come to college, right? Without you having to work hard in high school. And so just remember that when you get to college, you have earned your right to be there and seek out resources. What was my motivation? What kept me going? For me, a really big motivation was my family, because as I mentioned, my mom and my dad had moved back to Mexico, and my little brother, who was born in the U.S., he was a U.S. citizen, he went to Mexico with my parents because he was only 8, so he left with them. And I always knew that one day I wanted my younger brother to come back to the US, and I wanted him to go to college, and I knew that that would take a lot of resources. But when I was 26, he was 16, he came to live with me in New York. So I was able to bring my brother back to the US. I became his legal guardian. And he graduated from Texas Tech University a couple years ago. Now he works in finance in Dallas, and my motivation was always, how can I help my family? And now my motivation continues to be my family, but now I view my family as much bigger, as like the immigrant and Latino community, and that continues to motivate me now.
I never feel like what I'm doing now on people of other environment.
So how do I feel about people who are racist? Is that sort of the gist of the question? No.
What do you think about, how do you feel about Americans and people? How do you feel?
Okay, sure. So, I do think that there is a lot of racist forces that make it really difficult for people of color. I think a lot of that racism sometimes isn't even so overt. It's like subtle, and it can show up in like when we talk about sort of like structural racism. It really is true that there's a lot of institutions and things that were not created for people of color to thrive. But I also think that. I also think that there is a lot of people who are willing to be allies, and those who aren't. I've got to be honest about something. When I first started doing this work, my biggest motivation truly was I want to change people's hearts and minds. I want people who don't think that immigrants should be here to feel differently. And in some ways, I have found that that has been an empty endeavor, because there's people who unfortunately are never going to change their minds. And so I have shifted my thinking in the work that I do to really be more about helping people who are like me, to help them feel like they belong, so that we can take up space and we can hopefully break down those barriers. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. So the question is, in my adult life, how have I been treated differently because of my race, and how has that impacted me? And let me just ask about the time. How are we doing on time? 5 minutes, okay. Okay, so I'm going to share a story to illustrate my answer. A couple of days ago, on Monday, I flew to New York City from Los Angeles. And I flew to New York City because there is this clothing brand, this high-end clothing brand, that is using real women in their spring campaign. And I'm one of the women that's going to be part of the spring campaign. And so they flew me they paid for my flight from Los Angeles to New York, and I flew first class. And I was sitting in the plane. It was an overnight flight, so it left Los Angeles around midnight, and was getting to New York City around 5 a.m. So as soon as I got on the plane, I fell asleep. When I woke up, and the flight was almost going to land, and I got up to use the ladies' room, and the flight attendant looks at me and he says, "Coach passengers are not allowed to use the first class bathroom." This just happened to me on Monday. And, things like this happen to me often, and I just keep thinking, like, why did this keep happening to me? I was unfortunate. Things like this should shock people, but they don't shock me anymore because they've happened to me before. So what I mean about people not necessarily being racist to my face, like that to me was a very racist moment. Because whether or not he knew it, consciously or not, he made an assumption that someone that looks like me couldn't possibly be sitting in first class, right? That's what happened. And so I asked him, I said, "What makes you think I'm not sitting in first class?" He saw my empty seat and his whole demeanor just changed. He was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Thought you were a coach passenger." I'm like, "Yeah, you said as much." Of course, I would be lying to you if I told you that it didn't impact me. Like, of course, those types of things like really sting sometimes, because I think, why would you make those assumptions about me? But I try to use, sometimes I say something, like in this case I said something, and then there are other times when I just don't have the time or the energy to explain to someone why what they just did was racist. And I think that more and more I'm starting to realize and recognize that it is not my job to stop people from being racist. So I think the way that it has impacted me is has helped me to realize this, right? It has helped me to realize that it's not my job. I'm going to continue to do the work that I do, and hopefully it'll make ripple effects and it'll make changes. But unfortunately, those things happen to me, and sometimes I also just can tweet about them. So I always tell people, don't make you Twitter famous. Thank you.
All right, can we get one last round of applause for our incredible leaders? Today she has reminded us of some incredible lessons and ones that are important. Community and resilience. Nobody here has a perfect life. Nobody here doesn't have to work hard. Some of us have to work harder than others, but everyone needs help to be successful. It's important to be resilient, and it's important to support others in our community, so as a big Bulldog family, we can all be successful. Along with that, one of my favorite people, AOC Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, often says, "You can't be what you can't see." If there are issues that you see, if there's representation that you think is lacking, it's important for you to work hard and get into those positions so we together can create a future that we want to live in. Now, can I get everybody up on their feet? All right. So, with a show of hands, how many of you in here speak Spanish? In Spanish. So on the count of 3, we're all going to say gracias, Julisa. Everyone ready? 1, 2,